Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we're looking at Jesus washing the disciples' feet. This is a very popular story, very common story we see. I've probably taught about in the New Testament, and this comes right after he had sent them to prepare for the Passover. And so now we see this, and this comes from John. John's the only one who recorded this. Is John 13, verses 1 through 20. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I do want to hit a lot of these verses. And it says, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water in a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will. No, Peter protested, you will never ever wash my feet. Peter, being Peter in his typical fashion, Jesus replied, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. And so Simon Peter exclaimed, then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet. And then Jesus replied to him, a person who has bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you. He's calling out Judas. For Jesus knew who would betray him. That is what he meant when he said, not all of you are clean. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me the teacher and Lord, and you are right because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now, now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. And then he finishes this with, I'm not saying these things to all of you. I know that I know the ones I have chosen, but this fulfills the scripture that says, the one who eats my food is turned against me. I tell you this beforehand so that when it happens, you will believe that I am the Messiah. I tell you the truth, anyone who welcomes my messenger is welcoming me, and anyone who welcomes me is welcoming the Father who sent me. And so we see here John. So start this out, John 13, like all John 13 through 17 tells us what Jesus said to the disciples on the night before his death. John went into great detail. I mean, there's a lot of detail in these next couple of chapters about what all Jesus told them the night before he died. I mean, it makes up a good portion. Up until 13, it's several years of information, and then 13 to 17, and really 13 to the end of the John is like just a couple days time. And so he really goes into detail of all these things. And so all these words were spoken in one evening when, with only the disciples as his audience, he gave his instructions. Right, this was an intimate time with them that he gives them on all these instructions, and this was to prepare them for his death and resurrection, even events that would change their lives forever. And Jesus was and Jesus, so he uses this time to show that he was the model servant, and he showed the servant attitude to his disciples. Because washing a guest's feet, that was a job for a household servant to carry out, right? That when the guests arrived, that was the servant of the household did that. The Jesus, right? The Messiah should not be washing feet according to them. But Jesus wrapped around a towel around his waist, and as the lowliest slave would do, right, a servant would do, washed and dried his disciples' feet. And so the thought here is this: even if God in the flesh is willing to serve, we who is his followers must also be servants. That's what when he told them that, right? That we're not above the master. Sir, the teacher's not above, or the students aren't above the teacher. The servant's not above the master. So we have to be willing to serve in any way that glorifies God. And we need to remember that. And so the question is, are you willing to follow Christ's example of serving? Are you willing to do that? Are we willing to lower ourselves to the position of washing people's feet? And so, think about who you can serve. And so there's a special blessing for those who not only agree that humble service is Christ's way, but also follow through and do it. And that's the important thing. We talk about washing feet and being that way, but there's one thing about talking about it. There's a whole other thing to actually sit down and actually do it. And so we see here as he's doing this, Peter, being Peter in Peter fashion, it's like, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus responds to him and says, "Unless I wash your feet, you don't belong to me." And so there's a couple arguments, theological arguments, on what Jesus meant here. One, it could have been that unless he washed away Peter's sins by the death on the cross, that Peter could have no relation with him. You know, again, I can see where that comes in. Or that unless Peter submitted to him and allowed Jesus to minister in this way, Peter would never learn the lesson of humility. And I lean maybe more towards that second option. I mean, I think both of them can apply. But I think in the end, it was like, look, Peter, you have to learn to be this way, right? You're going to have to learn that you're a servant, and that you will wash people's feet. And I think that's maybe the lesson that Jesus was trying to teach them there. It could have been the whole washing away of sins thing. I mean, that can apply too. But I lean more toward the second one. But either way, right? Peter submitted to him and allowed Jesus to minister in this way. Peter would have never learned, right? Or I'm sorry, Peter seemed to grasp the significance of Jesus' words, for then because he wanted him to say, okay, then I want you to basically bathe me completely, right? Wash my hands and my heads, not just my feet. Wash me all over. And and so Peter seemed to grasp what Jesus was telling him. Jesus did not wash his disciples' feet just to get them to be nice to each other, right? It wasn't this, oh, well, I want you to get along, right? His far greater goal was to extend his mission on earth after he was gone. And he wanted them to understand what that mission was going to look like. Right? These men were to move into the world serving God, right? Serving each other and serving all the people to whom they took the message of salvation to. And that was the whole idea there. And we see them do this. We see them end up doing this and go through that. And then the rest thing, I don't have notes in it on our outline, but the other thing we see is he calls Judas out, right? He didn't call him out by name, but he calls him out and talks about the one who's going to betray him. And he suggests that to the one who's going to betray him. We're going to see later on. He tells him to go do what he's going to do, and we're going to see that. But he starts to hint around that, hey, Judas is about to do this. Judas is about to betray me, and he kind of starts calling that out and letting focusing in on that, and we see that. And so, but the main message in this is, right, as Christians, we are to wash people's feet. Now, literally, figuratively, right? Maybe both. But we are to humble ourselves to the point that we're willing to wash someone's feet if it benefits in serving them. And that's the kind of service and the kind of attitude that we're called to have with Jesus. So we need to make sure we follow. That's hard, right? It is hard to lower ourselves. It is hard to humble ourselves. And that's part of what in the Christianity we see. That's what makes it hard, is because we want to elevate ourselves up. Well, I'm important, right? I'm this. I'm way up here, and that makes being a Christian hard. And we're called to humble ourselves and lower ourselves to the position of a servant or a slave, depending on what translation or what wording you use. And that's what we're called to be, and that's how we're called to be toward the world, not only to each other, but to the world. And we need to make sure we remember that and try to practice that the best we can. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching and tuning in and following along. I really appreciate those who followed along from the beginning. We're getting closer and closer to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And we got a lot to go through in the next couple of weeks. Still, there's a lot. I mean, some people don't realize it. There's a lot to unpack in just before the crucifixion that Jesus talks about, and Jesus tells his disciples and teaches them, and they learn about before he goes and is crucified. So I hope you're enjoying this. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please do that, because that helps you stay in touch, helps us notify you whenever we publish videos. And as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.